بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا حبيبنا المصطفى وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. When Ibrahim alayhi salam was of a very young age, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him a special understanding. Ibrahim alayhi salam understood that what his people were doing and what his people were worshipping did not quite make sense. And Ibrahim alayhi salam is considered to be Khalilullah, the close friend of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The word Khalil in the Arabic language denotes the highest level of closeness and a relationship between two people. Famously, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, لَوْ اتَّخَذْتُ خَلِيلًا لَاتَّخَذْتُ أَبَا بَكْرٍ خَلِيلًا. That if I were to take a Khalil, someone of that close in friendship, I would have taken Abu Bakr radiallahu an as a Khalil, but Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam's Khalil was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Ibrahim alayhi salam is known as Khalilullah, the one of the closest or the closest friend of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the reason why Ibrahim alayhi salam's position is so close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is because where many Anbiya Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed ayat and revealed signs directly to them, Ibrahim alayhi salam's his method or his way to coming to the realization that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was his Lord and his Master was one of discovery, one where he understood himself implicitly that no, worshipping idols does not quite make sense. Worshipping something which is contingent, which has been man-made, something which is temporary, doesn't quite make sense. And so in Ibrahim alayhi salam we find a path for every single person to follow. That if a person does not, and in fact this is a position also within, out of the two positions or schools of thought within Aqidah, we have one position which is that those people whom the message of Islam has not reached, what should they follow, or what will be their hukm, what will be their state on the day of Qiyamah. So one of the answers that ulama give is actually that they have to do what Ibrahim alayhi salam did. That they should be, or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given every single person enough understanding that they can come to the realization of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala without any revelation revealed to them. That a person does not need revelation, but that they should be able to see in the world around them that there is a creator. What that creator is, or who that creator is, or what his attributes are, that requires revelation, but at the very least a person should come to that understanding. And so in Ibrahim alayhi salam we find that perfect example. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given him this unique understanding. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given Ibrahim alayhi salam this unique fahm, this unique understanding and comprehension of the realities of this life and the realities of this world. So Ibrahim alayhi salam at a very young age, he comes out, فَلَمَّا جَنَّ عَلَيْهِ اللَّيْلِ. And in fact, even before that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَإِذْ قَالَ إِبْرَاهِيمُ لِأَبِيهِ آزَرَ أَتَتَّخِذُ أَصْنَامًا آلِهَةً. That he said to his father, whose name was Azar, that do you create or do you take these idols as your God, as gods? إِنِّي أَرَاكَ وَقَوْمَكَ فِي ضَلَالٍ. And the moon comes out, and the moon overpowers, because of the light of the moon, it overpowers the light of the stars. And so when the moon comes out, he's saying this again, the depth of meaning of the pendant or something else. That thing which can be overpowered cannot be. We find a perfect, what constitutes the ayat of the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala aqidah should be, or what our belief should be. So when he sees these, that which sets, and amazingly, incredibly, the Quran is with its depth of meaning and the breadth of its meaning here, he is almost, that one could take that meaning out here. Ibrahim alayhi salam is giving a deity deserving of ones, that this is Allah and Allah deserves to be worshipped. Then automatically a person comes to that understanding that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is deserving. Those whom love you, those, and the love of a'mal, love for those actions, love for those things which bring me closer to your love. This is, and then finally, Allahumma ja'al hubbaka ahabba al-ashya'i ilayya. Allah, make your love the most beloved out of everything to me. That is a person's understanding of what also, like I mentioned, of what our theology should be, of how we should understand who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, how we should understand Tawheed, but also our relationship and our connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what our connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala should be. And our connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala should really and truly be one of love. Be one أَشَدُّ حُبًّا لِلَّهِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, from amongst the people, there are those people who take those things or certain deities or things of worship, and they make them, or they love them as they should love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا أَشَدُّ حُبًّا لِلَّهِ. The people who believe, their love is greatest for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is in fact, even Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions this in the Quran as well, that the people who subhanahu wa ta'ala, the fact that we have himself, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses the word of khawf. So the difference, ulama mentioned the difference between khashiyah and khawf is that khawf is dread, is fear. It's, something's going to happen to you, or someone's holding a knife, or someone's holding a gun to you, and that's khawf. You're scared and you're afraid, or you don't do something because again you're afraid. It's you don't speed down the road, you don't you don't do something illegal, you don't park on a double yellow light because you're scared of the £35 fine, or you're scared of whatever it may be. You're scared of the police catching you, you're scared of going to jail. You don't do certain things because you're afraid. There's no love for the police in there. You're not doing it because you love the police and you have some sort of obedience to the police. It's pure fear. It's because you don't want the negative consequences of your actions. Whereas Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when it comes to khashiyah, so that is a child, for example, when it comes, or a child with their parents, or a child with their teacher, or someone that a person admires. Now a person, whether that be a boss, whether that be a colleague, whether that be a spouse, whoever it may be, we have a sense of, I'm scared of what they may say to me, or they may do to me, but it's because I don't want to make them feel that I've done something that's let them down. I am scared of that love for them is so intense, that love for that person or whoever that may be is so much that you don't want to let them down. You don't want to be on the receiving end of them just being upset with you. That is what khashiyah is. And so our relationship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is one of khashiyah, is a relationship of, yes, we are afraid of, we are scared of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we are scared of His adhab, we are scared of the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is muntaqim, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the avenger, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is jabbar, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is aziz. Allah azza wa jal can, yes, very easily and very quickly, without cause, without delay, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can punish us. But at the same time, we don't not disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we don't stay away from bad deeds, and we don't stay away and we don't do good because and purely because we are afraid of Allah, but it rather is because we do not want to let down the expectations that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has of us. Allah azza wa jal expects much from His servants, and we don't want to let Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala down in that sense. So that is khashiyah. And so Ibrahim alayhi salam, coming back, Ibrahim alayhi salam is there, and he says, I cannot be obedient towards, I cannot worship that thing which sets. Then he sees the moon. This is something which sets again, and because of the setting of the moon happens with the rising of the sun. And when the sun comes up, obviously the sun completely overpowers the night, and the sun comes up in all its might and glory as it may seem. And Ibrahim alayhi salam says, فَلَمَّا رَأَى الشَّمْسَ بَازِغَةً قَالَ هَذَا رَبِّي هَذَا أَكْبَرُ. This is the greatest of them all, so this must be my Lord. But when the sun also set, so he must have stayed there for the entire night and the duration of the day as well. When the sun also set, he says, فَلَمَّا رَأَى الشَّمْسَ بَازِغَةً قَالَ هَذَا رَبِّي هَذَا أَكْبَرُ فَلَمَّا أَفَلَتْ. When the sun also set, he made dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he asked for guidance, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him that understanding that it is the creator of the heavens and the earth, that there is a being that has to exist, that must have created all of this. And in Ibrahim alayhi salam, we come to this understanding about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We come to this understanding of Tawheed, first and foremost. That also we come to this understanding of the idea of something being temporary and the idea of something being permanent. Something which is changing, something which changes with the time of day, something which is dependent on other thing, that cannot be a Lord. So anything that is created, anything that can change, anything that can be destroyed, anything that can be made, anything that can be fashioned and created, anything that at some point did not exist and came into existence, and anything that can one day cease to exist, cannot be a Lord, cannot be something that is worthy of worship. And so Ibrahim alayhi salam, in his story, we learn most importantly that the object of our worship and the object of our obedience and the object of our ibadah has to be a creator, a being, that the way of Ibrahim alayhi salam, it is from there Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then revealed himself to Ibrahim alayhi salam. And this understanding is a deep and innate understanding. It's an understanding of fitrah. It's an understanding that every single child has. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that كل مولود يولد على الفطرة, that every single child is born with fitrah, with a sound reasoning, a sound understanding. Now the ulama have mentioned what is fitrah. Some mention that this is why we say that a person reverts when they become a Muslim, but that is this understanding of Islam. And some ulama have mentioned no, it's not an understanding, it's not Islam as we know it of revelation, but it is Islam of submission. It is Islam that a person should be able to come to that conclusion that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created me. So every single person is born with this understanding. A child understands that if something is happening in front of me, that there has to be a cause for it. That if something is happening, that there has to be a cause. If there's a sound here, that there must be somewhere where that sound is coming from. If there is something popped into existence here, there has to be somewhere where it comes from. A child looks for a cause. Every single person looks for a cause. Every single person understands that those things which are temporary, those things which are transitant, those things cannot be, do not have power. Likewise, every single person understands something which is stationary, something which is not moving, cannot be a Lord, cannot be something which deserves my worship. It is only through indoctrination of people, it is only through the words and the sayings of people around them that eventually children are brought up into idolatry. Children are brought up into believing in some sort of false god. Whereas every single child, every single person has this understanding of one is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala necessarily has to exist. And then secondly, every single person also knows and understands that there can only be one God. Everyone knows that there cannot be two bosses. Anywhere where there is two bosses, you're going to have a problem. And so the understanding of Tawheed again is innate. The understanding of the fact that that there has to be لو كان فيهما آلهة إلا الله لفسدتا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that if there was any God besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then the entire the way and the workings of the heavens and the earth would completely be corrupted, wouldn't work. And so this understanding that Ibrahim alayhi salam has given us, this is an understanding of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Once a person internalizes this, once a person comes to this understanding, then the next level is to develop taqwa. Develop a deep-rooted, firm belief that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is always watching me. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is always above me. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is always there, always watching. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Sami' and Basir. Allah is the all-knowing, all-seeing. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the all-hearing. Allah azza wa jal is everywhere. Every single action that I do, every single action that I take, every single word that I say, all of it is recorded, and all of it I am going to answer for. That is taqwa. And if a person was to give the essence of what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam tried to impart to every single person, it would be this. Taqwa is the most important element for a person, because simply if a person has taqwa, then it is very, very difficult for a person to commit sin. It is not impossible, but a person finds it very, very difficult to commit sin. Simply because the person understands that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching them. And in every single action that they do, a person understands that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching them. It is very difficult for them to then do something wrong, because that understanding, that knowledge, that realization that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching is very similar. For example, if a person is driving down a road, those of us who live in Leicester, mashallah, Uppingham Road, as you're driving up, you're going towards it, there's a very nice long run from Shell, where you can put your foot down a bit. But when you come up towards that intersection and there's that camera there, every single person knows, no matter, if you've been in Leicester for living there for a few years and you've been driving on the roads, you know that at that point you have to slam on the brakes. And in fact, many of us, even before there, from Shell, we'll put our brakes on and mashallah, we'll be going at 30 all the way. Just because we know that sometimes what can happen is you get a bit, you maybe put the foot down a bit and you're not paying attention, and before you know it, you're flashed. You've got your ticket. So every single person understands as they're driving down that road that this road, there is a camera there, and because there's a camera there, I'm going to have to make sure that I don't go above 30. Likewise, if you're on the motorway, mashallah, you're on the motorway, and there's camera signs everywhere, and you're on the M1, mashallah, you're on the M1, and there's cameras everywhere, and there's an average speed check, and if you go above a certain thing, and you're going to get the post, mashallah, you're going to get the message very soon in the mail. So a person understands this. A person knows this. And because of that constant awareness that, you look at your speedometer and you see it go a little bit, immediately you'll drop it. Immediately you goes a bit more higher, you drop it. Many of us might just, resort to simply using cruise control. But that is because we've understood that the moment I slip up, there is someone watching. The moment I slip up, there is a camera that is just ready there to take that picture. There is someone watching no matter what happens. The moment I slip up. So a person has that, even if you're having a conversation with the person next to you, you might be listening to a podcast while you're driving home from work, you might be doing something else. You might have had a very bad day at work, but whatever it is, when you're driving there, you know that that's going to be there. Immediately your brain switches on. And that awareness, the fact that somewhere in the subconscious there's this flick, there's this switch that automatically switches on, that understands that, there's a camera here, we need to make sure that we're going at a certain speed. That awareness is taqwa. Now, taqwa of a speed camera is obviously something which is a little less desirable, but taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that awareness, that innate awareness of the subconscious that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching me. Now, that is not to say that a person cannot slip up. Because many of us, it might have been the case that you might have been there, you might have even realized that there's a camera there and unfortunately you've slipped up. You've put your foot down a bit too much. It can happen, it can slip up. But that is not to say that a person cannot slip up. But that subconscious telling us constantly that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching, and that understanding that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is always watching me, that has to be in the subconscious. That has to be there, constantly switched on. And every now and then prodding us and reminding us. And like I mentioned, if Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam came to give us something, it was this iman and this yaqeen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this complete conviction in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is always watching a person. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is always watching a person. And like I mentioned, the subconscious that ticks in every now and then, that constantly reminds us that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has given us ways to make sure that subconscious is also built, that we are constantly reminded. The 5 times salah in the day, for example. This is just one example. The 5 times salah in the day are spread throughout the day. That if a person does not have it within themselves, meaning a person, maybe they don't have taqwa within themselves, it's not constantly telling them again and again, but by them performing their salah, by them going to the masjid and performing salah, and if a person is performing salah properly, doing their wudu properly, and they are, constantly in awareness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when they are performing the salah, they are aware of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala whilst they are performing the salah. That in itself, if not by the software of the brain, then by the hardware of performing salah, by going to the masjid and having to perform salah, automatically you're reminded of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is just one way. Likewise, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has told us that when you enter the masjid, when you leave the masjid, when you get into the house, when you leave the house, when you enter the